Little girl begs Mafia boss to help her mother hide from her stepdad. What he does next shocks all. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The night was quiet, too quiet for a young girl named Emily. At just 8 years old, she had already learned the painful truth of what it meant to grow up in fear. Her mother, Sarah, was a kind woman, a woman who had once dreamed of a better life for them both. But dreams had a funny way of dying when the man you loved turned into someone you feared. Emily stood in the dim hallway of their small apartment, staring at the cracked walls and listening to the angry shouts coming from the other room. Her stepfather, Greg, was at it again. The man she had once called Dad had become a monster, a man who drank too much, yelled too loud, and hit too hard. Every night, it was the same, the screams, the fear, the helplessness. But tonight was different. Tonight, Emily had decided she could not take it anymore. She slipped on her worn-out sneakers, grabbed the small pink backpack she had packed in secret, and tiptoed toward the front door. Her heart pounded in her chest. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she couldn't stay. Not anymore. She opened the door just enough to squeeze through, careful not to wake her mother or Greg. The cold air hit her face as she stepped outside into the night, and she pulled her jacket tighter around her tiny frame. She had no destination, no plan, but she knew one thing. She needed help. She ran through the quiet streets of the city, her feet pounding against the pavement, her breath coming in shallow gasps. It wasn't long before she found herself in front of a large building with a black SUV parked out front. The man standing near the car caught her eye. He was tall, wearing a dark suit, his face partially obscured by shadows. His eyes, though, were unmistakable. There was something cold, calculating in them, but there was also something else. Curiosity? Concern? Emily didn't know, but she found herself walking toward him. "Hey, kid," the man said in a deep voice, his accent thick but clear. "What are you doing out here so late?" Emily looked up at him, her voice trembling. "Please, help my mom. She's in trouble. My stepdad, he's hurting her." The man studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without a word, he motioned for her to come closer. "Get in the car," he said. Emily hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward, her small hands clutching the straps of her backpack tightly. She had no idea who this man was, but she knew one thing. He was her last hope. As she climbed into the back of the black SUV, she looked up at the man, wondering who he was and why he was helping her. The door closed with a soft thud, and the car began to move. The man didn't speak again, but Emily could feel his eyes on her. She didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of a new chapter in her life. A chapter where the man in the suit would change everything. The car sped through the empty streets, the hum of the engine, the only sound breaking the silence of the night. Emily sat in the back seat, staring at her hands, her heart racing with fear and confusion. She didn't know who the man in the suit was or where he was taking her, but the cold determination in his eyes when he looked at her earlier made her feel like she had no other choice. It was either trust him or go back to the hell she had just escaped. The SUV turned onto a quiet, well-lit street, the buildings towering over them like silent giants. The man glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "Don't be afraid," he said, his voice low and calm, though there was an edge to it. "I'm not going to hurt you." Emily nodded but didn't say anything. She didn't know how to respond. Her world had just been turned upside down, and she was too scared to speak. They drove for what felt like an eternity before the car finally slowed and pulled into a large, gated property. The gates opened automatically as they approached, and the car passed through them, winding up a long driveway lined with trees. Emily's eyes widened. The mansion in front of her was enormous, its lights gleaming in the darkness like something out of a movie. She had never seen anything like it. As the car came to a stop in front of the grand entrance, the man in the suit stepped out first, then opened the door for Emily. "Come on," he said, holding out a hand. Emily hesitated for a moment before stepping out of the car. The cool night air hit her face as she looked up at the mansion, her small feet sinking into the gravel driveway. She had never been inside a place like this before. It felt surreal. The man led her up the steps to the front door, where two large guards stood, their eyes scanning her as she walked past them. The door opened before they even reached it, revealing a tall, elegant woman with dark hair and sharp features. She was dressed in a sleek black dress, her eyes narrowing as she looked at Emily. "Is this her?" she asked, her voice cool. "Yes," the man replied. "She's with me now." The woman stepped aside, allowing them both to enter. Emily walked into the grand foyer, her eyes wide as she took in the opulence of the place. The marble floors gleamed under the soft light of crystal chandeliers, and the walls were adorned with paintings and sculptures that looked like they belonged in a museum. It was all so overwhelming. "This is Emily," the man said, turning to the woman. "She's safe here. She'll stay with us until we figure out what to do next." The woman nodded, but there was something in her eyes that made Emily feel uneasy. She didn't trust this place, not yet. "I'll have her things brought to the guest room," the woman said, her tone businesslike. "Make her comfortable. We'll need to discuss this further in the morning." Emily didn't respond. She was too scared to speak. She looked up at the man, who had been silent since they arrived. He was watching her carefully, his face unreadable. "What's going to happen to me?" she finally whispered, her voice trembling. The man's gaze softened for a moment, but only for a moment. "You're safe now," he said, his voice calm but firm. "No one will hurt you. I promise." Emily wanted to believe him. She really did. But something deep inside her told her that this was just the beginning of something much darker. She didn't know what kind of world she had just entered, but she had a feeling she was in over her head. As she followed the woman through the mansion, she couldn't help but wonder about the man who had brought her here. Who was he really? And what did he want from her? She was about to find out. The next morning, Emily woke to the sound of birds chirping outside the massive windows of her new room. It was bright, almost blinding, and for a moment, she forgot where she was. The bed was soft, too soft. The pillows, so fluffy that she sank into them, felt like a dream. But as the fog of sleep cleared, the memories came rushing back. The shouting, the fear, the cold hand that had offered her escape. She sat up slowly, the silk sheets slipping off her body as she placed her feet on the cold marble floor. She looked around the room in awe. It was larger than the entire apartment she and her mom had shared. The walls were adorned with expensive artwork, and the light from the chandelier shimmered off the polished floors. A sense of unease crawled up her spine. She wasn't sure what she had walked into, but the luxurious surroundings only made her more nervous. Just a few hours ago, she had been running through the streets, scared for her life. Now, she was in a mansion, with strangers who seemed to know more about her than she knew about herself. Emily stood and walked toward the window, peering out over the sprawling grounds. The view was breathtaking: gardens, fountains, and a high iron fence that separated the property from the world outside. It was a world apart, and she was in the middle of it. She turned away from the window and went to the door. It was locked. She hesitated for a moment before sitting back down on the bed. She was trapped. There was no way out, not unless they let her. Her mind raced. What had happened to her mother? Was she safe? Was Greg still out? They're looking for them. The questions were endless, but Emily knew she had to wait for answers. The door creaked open, and Emily looked up. The man in the suit entered, his dark eyes scanning the room before resting on her. He said nothing at first. He just watched her. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. "Your mother is safe," he said, his words offering a slight relief. Emily didn't know how to respond. She didn't trust him. She couldn't. But she had to know. "Where is she? Is she all right?" she asked, her voice trembling. The man nodded. "She's fine. She's resting. You'll see her soon." Emily wanted to believe him, but something in his voice made her doubt his sincerity. He wasn't lying, not exactly, but he wasn't telling the whole truth either. There was more to the story, and Emily was sure of it. He didn't move, just stood there, waiting. "Why are you helping us?" Emily finally asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. The man's expression didn't change. "Because I can," he replied simply. "And because I owe your mother." Emily's confusion deepened. Owed her mother? What did that even mean? "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The man looked at her for a long time before answering. "My name is Dominic Marino, and I'm someone who has the power to make sure no one ever hurts you or your mother again." He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. But you need to understand something, Emily. There's no going back. You're with me now, and you're safer here than anywhere else. Emily's stomach churned at his words. She didn't know if he was a good man or a bad one. All she knew was that she had no choice. She was stuck in this world of danger and luxury, a world that felt so far removed from everything she had ever known. And yet, there was a part of her that wanted to trust him, a part that wanted to believe that this was her chance for a better life. Dominic didn't wait for her response. He turned and walked toward the door, stopping just before he exited. You'll have everything you need here, he said, his voice softening. But remember, you're not just under my protection. You're in my world now. And, in my world, no one crosses me. He left without another word, the door closing behind him with a quiet click. Emily sat in silence for a long time, the weight of his words sinking in. She was in his world now, and she wasn't sure if that was a blessing or a curse. The next few days were a blur for Emily. She woke up each morning in the guest room, a space that felt like it belonged to someone else. It was bigger than her old apartment, the bed softer, and the silence was almost suffocating. The mansion was vast, and its cold marble floors echoed as she moved through its hallways. She knew it was meant to be a place of safety, but all it did was remind her of how far away she was from the life she once knew. The man who had brought her here, Dominic Marino, barely spoke to her. His presence loomed over her, always watching from a distance, like a shadow she couldn't escape. He had told her she was safe, that no one could hurt her now, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she had walked into a world she wasn't prepared for. He had kept his promise about her mother. Sarah was here, in a room across the hall, and though she was still recovering from the shock of everything that had happened, she was alive. That was the one thing that brought Emily any peace. She would find her mother, and they would get out of here. But it wasn't that simple. Every day, the mansion felt more like a prison. Every time she tried to leave the room, a guard appeared, quietly following her from a distance. There were no windows to escape through, and the heavy iron gates surrounding the property made it impossible to even think about running away. Emily couldn't help but wonder what kind of world she had been brought into. Dominic's men, all wearing dark suits and carrying themselves like soldiers, seemed to run the place. The mansion was filled with expensive furniture and artwork, but it lacked warmth. It was all a facade. She had seen what the Mafia could do. She had seen her stepfather, Greg, turn into a monster, and she had heard the whispers about people like Dominic Marino, men who controlled everything with an iron fist. It was the kind of world she never imagined stepping into. One evening, after dinner, Dominic approached her. He had been quiet for most of the day, but now he stood in the doorway of her room, watching her. His sharp features were softened by the dim light, but there was still something calculating in his eyes. "You're getting restless," he said, his voice low and even. Emily looked up from where she had been sitting on the bed. She had never felt so trapped in her life. "I don't want to be here," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic's gaze hardened for a moment, but he didn't move. "I understand," he said. "But you're here because you have no choice." Emily's chest tightened. "What do you want from us? Why are you helping us?" Dominic remained silent for a long time, and Emily wondered if he would even answer. Finally, he spoke. "Your mother owes me." Emily didn't understand. "Owes you what?" she asked, her voice trembling. Dominic's eyes darkened. "Not money, but something much more valuable. And now, I'm here to make sure no one hurts you or her again." Emily's mind raced, but she couldn't process the words. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. Dominic stepped into the room, his presence overwhelming. "Stay here. Learn what it means to be safe. To be under my protection," he said. "Once you're ready, we'll figure out what comes next." Emily wanted to say something, to argue, but she couldn't find the words. She was stuck in this place, in this world, and there was no way out. "I'm not your prisoner," she said, her voice a little stronger now. Dominic looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You're not. But you will be, until I decide it's time for you to go." His words hung in the air like a threat, but Emily couldn't tell if it was meant as one. He turned and walked out of the room, closing the door quietly behind him. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the door. She didn't know what to make of this man. He was powerful, yes, but there was something else, something hidden beneath the surface that she couldn't quite understand. He was offering her protection, but at what cost? And what kind of protection was it if it kept her locked in a mansion, away from the world she knew? The more she thought about it, the more she realized that she didn't know how to escape this world. She was at Dominic's mercy, and she wasn't sure whether that was a blessing or a curse. Emily spent the next few days trying to adjust to her new life in the mansion. The luxury was overwhelming, and the silence was deafening. It felt like she was in a dream, one she couldn't wake up from. The grand halls, the expensive furniture, the crystal chandeliers, everything felt alien to her. She was used to small apartments, cramped spaces, and the constant noise of the outside world. Now, she was surrounded by quiet, almost unnerving luxury, and it made her feel more isolated than ever. Every day, she waited for the moment when she would be able to leave, but that moment never came. She had no choice but to stay, under the watchful eye of Dominic Marino and his men. Though he told her she was safe, she couldn't shake the feeling that he had other motives. He was kind, yes, but his kindness came with a price. Emily couldn't help but wonder if she would ever be able to leave this place, or if she was just another pawn in his game. The days blurred together, each one indistinguishable from the next. Emily spent her time reading books she found scattered throughout the mansion, exploring the endless halls, and trying to make sense of the strange new world she had found herself in. She couldn't bring herself to talk to anyone. The guards who watched her every move never spoke to her, and the few servants she encountered were either too busy or too scared to make eye contact. It wasn't until a week later that she saw Dominic again. He appeared in her room one evening, his sharp features softened by the dim light. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, watching her. Emily could feel his eyes on her, the weight of his presence filling the room. "Are you comfortable?" he asked after a long silence. Emily didn't answer right away. She couldn't. She didn't know how to answer. "Yes," she finally said, her voice barely audible. "Good," he said, nodding. He took a step forward, his presence dominating the room. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice low and measured. "You've been here for a week now, and I know it's been hard for you to adjust. But you need to understand something. You're not a prisoner here. You're safe, and I will do whatever it takes to make sure you stay safe." Emily looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any hint of sincerity. She wanted to believe him, but every time she thought about the world she had left behind, the fear crept back in. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice trembling. Dominic's gaze hardened, but there was something in his eyes, something almost protective. "Because I can," he replied, his voice steady. "And because I owe your mother." Emily felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She still didn't understand what he meant by that, but the weight of his words left her speechless. "I don't want to be a part of this world," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just want to go home." Dominic stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "This is your home now," he said softly. "For as long as you need it." The words hung in the air like a threat, but Emily couldn't bring herself to challenge him. She didn't have the strength. "I know this is hard to understand," Dominic continued, his voice softening. "But this is the only place where you and your mother will be safe. I won't let anything happen to either of you." His words should have been comforting, but Emily still felt uneasy. She didn't know if she could trust him, or if he was just another person who wanted to control her. "You're not leaving here until I say so," Dominic added, his tone more firm now. "But don't worry. I'll make sure you have everything you need. Food, books, whatever you want. Just don't try to leave. It's not safe out there." Emily stared at him, her mind racing. She wanted to run. She wanted to escape, to go back to the world she knew. But something in Dominic's eyes made her pause. He wasn't like Greg. He didn't seem interested in hurting her. At least, not in the way Greg had. But she couldn't ignore the feeling that this was all part of a larger plan, one that she didn't fully understand. "I won't let you go," Dominic said again, his voice low. "Not until I know you're ready. Until I can trust you." Emily's heart raced as she realized the truth. She was trapped, not just in the mansion, but in a world that she couldn't escape. And the man who had promised her safety was the one who held the key to her freedom. Days turned into weeks, and Emily's life in the mansion became a strange, surreal routine. She was given everything she could ever want: books, art supplies, food delivered on silver trays. But the more she had, the more isolated she felt. The mansion, though beautiful, was a gilded cage. There were no windows in her room, No doors that opened to the outside world, only heavy, iron gates that separated her from everything she had known. The guards kept a watchful eye on her, always just out of sight, never speaking unless spoken to. The only time Emily interacted with anyone other than Dominic was when she saw her mother, Sarah. Sarah had been keeping to herself in her own room, trying to recover from the trauma of the past few weeks. Emily visited her often, though the visits were brief and always closely monitored. Sarah seemed distant, lost in her own thoughts, and Emily couldn't help but wonder if her mother truly understood the gravity of the situation. She had been told they were safe, but Emily had her doubts. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating, as if something was about to explode. It wasn't until one afternoon, after weeks of quiet and uncertainty, that things started to change. Dominic entered Emily's room, his face expressionless as usual, but his eyes were different, harder, colder, like the man he was known to be. "It's time," he said, his voice steady. "You need to learn what this world is really about." Emily stared at him, unsure of what he meant. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. Dominic didn't answer right away. He just stood there, looking at her, as if deciding something in his mind. "I've protected you," he began, his voice low. "But protection comes at a price. You can't stay in this mansion forever, hiding from the world. It's time for you to understand who I am, what I do, and why you're here." Emily's heart raced. She had heard rumors, whispers about the world Dominic was a part of, but she never imagined she would have to face it herself. "Why me?" she asked. "Why bring me into this world?" Dominic stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "Because you're part of my world now," he said, his tone final. "Your mother owed me, and now you owe me too. But it's not just about debt. It's about loyalty, about understanding that this world isn't kind. You'll learn how to survive in it. And once you do, you'll understand why you're here." Emily's chest tightened. She had no choice but to follow him. She had already seen the danger, the kind of power Dominic wielded, and she knew that resisting him would only make things worse. "Come with me," he said, turning toward the door. Emily hesitated, but followed. They walked through the mansion, down long corridors, past rooms she had never been in, until they reached a large, dark room. The air inside was thick with tension, and Emily could feel the weight of the people inside before she even saw them. There were several men sitting at a long table, all dressed in dark suits, their faces unreadable. At the head of the table sat a man Emily had never seen before. He was older, with a sharp jawline and eyes that were cold and calculating. He looked up as Dominic and Emily entered, his gaze flicking over her with a curious, almost predatory interest. "This is Emily," Dominic said, his voice firm. "She's part of this now. You all need to understand that." The man at the table nodded, though his eyes never left Emily. "Welcome to the family," he said, his voice low and smooth. "I'm Victor Petrov, and you're here because you have something to offer." Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she looked around the room. These were dangerous men, the kind of men she had only heard about in whispers. And she was caught in their world now, a world she didn't know how to navigate. Dominic placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm, but not unkind. "Stay close," he murmured, as if reading her thoughts. "You're safe here, but you need to learn how to survive. These men," he gestured to the others at the table, "they will test you. They will push you, but you will learn. You'll have no choice but to learn." Emily nodded, though. Her mind was racing. She had been thrown into a world of power, fear, and danger, and now there was no way out. She was in the middle of it, and the only thing she could do was survive. As the meeting continued, Emily sat silently, absorbing everything around her. The men talked about business, deals, shipments, money, and power. Their words were foreign to her, but she could feel the weight of their meaning. This was the world she had been pulled into, a world where loyalty, control, and survival were everything. And Emily knew, in that moment, that her life would never be the same again. The following days were a whirlwind of lessons and harsh realities for Emily. She spent her mornings in the mansion's vast library, reading books about business, power, and survival, while Dominic watched her closely, offering her no comfort but plenty of instruction. His cold demeanor was a constant reminder of the world she had been thrust into, and as much as she wanted to rebel, to fight for the life she had lost, she knew deep down that there was no escape. Not now. Not yet. One evening, after dinner, Dominic approached her again. This time, he didn't seem to have that calculating edge to his voice. Instead, he looked almost concerned. "You've been quiet lately," he said, standing in the doorway of her room. "I know this isn't easy for you. It wasn't supposed to be." Emily looked up from the book she had been reading. She didn't want to look weak, but she couldn't hide the frustration and fear bubbling up inside her. "I don't belong here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Dominic stepped inside, closing the door behind him, his expression unreadable. "You're right," he said. "You don't belong here. But you're here now, and you'll either learn to live with it or you'll break. I can't protect you if you break." His words cut through her like a knife. She wanted to scream, to tell him that she didn't need his protection, that she didn't want any part of his world. But she couldn't. She was trapped in a gilded cage, and every part of her wanted to escape, but she knew that doing so would be the end of her. "I want to leave," Emily said, her voice shaking with emotion. Dominic looked at her for a long time before speaking again. "You can't leave," he said softly. "Not unless you want them to find you. And trust me, you don't want that." Emily's heart raced. Who are you talking about?" "People like Viktor Petrov," Dominic replied, his voice cold. "People who don't care about your life. People who think that you're a commodity, a pawn in a game they control." Emily felt her stomach twist at the mention of Petrov's name. She had heard the rumors, whispers about the dangerous man who controlled everything in the underworld. And now, she was caught in his web. Dominic watched her carefully, his eyes filled with a strange mixture of pity and resolve. "I know it's hard to understand," he said, "but you need to realize something. You're not just my responsibility, Emily. You're part of something much bigger now. You have a role to play." Emily shook her head, her mind racing. "No," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I don't want a role in your world. I just want my mom. I want to go home." Dominic's expression hardened, and for a moment, his cold exterior cracked. "Your mother is safe," he said firmly. "But you need to stop thinking about running away. It's not possible. You're here, with me, whether you like it or not. And I'll protect you, as long as you're willing to accept that." His words were like a chain wrapping tighter around her, and Emily knew, deep down, that there was no going back. She had no choice but to stay and face the world that had been thrust upon her. She wanted to fight. She wanted to scream. But what good would it do? What could she possibly do against someone like Dominic Marino? Someone who controlled so much. Someone who could make her disappear in an instant if she tried to cross him? The truth was, Emily was trapped. The life she had once known was gone, replaced by a harsh new reality. She had become part of Dominic's world, and no matter how much she wanted to escape, she knew that doing so would mean the end. So, she sat in silence, staring at the floor, the weight of everything pressing down on her. The fear, the helplessness, the frustration. She wanted to fight, but she didn't know how. And all she could do now was wait. Wait for the next move, the next lesson in survival. Because in this world, that's all she had left. Survival. Emily had spent the past few weeks trying to get used to her new life, but it felt like nothing was real. She had been moved from one world to another, from a life of fear and uncertainty to a life of luxury and danger. Dominic's mansion was her prison, and though he said she was safe, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was in more danger than ever before. She still didn't fully understand why she was here or what it was that her mother owed Dominic, but every day she felt more like a pawn in a game she wasn't prepared to play. Dominic continued his cold, calculating ways, keeping his distance, but making sure she knew her place. He never let her forget that she was in his world now. But one day, something shifted. Emily had been exploring the grounds of the mansion, looking for something, anything that might help her understand this new life she was living. She had come across a small garden near the back of the property. It was quiet there, the air fresh, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to imagine what life could be like if she weren't caught up in this mess. As she stood by the garden gate, lost in thought, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned quickly, and there stood Dominic. His sharp features were softened by the afternoon light, and for a moment, he almost looked human. "I see you've found your way out here," he said, his voice soft but still carrying an edge. Emily didn't respond. She didn't know what to say. For weeks, she had been following his rules, trying to stay out of trouble. But now, here he was, in her space. invading her moment of peace. I didn't mean to disturb you, Dominic continued, his gaze following her as she stepped away from the gate. But there's something you need to understand. This life, the one I've given you, it's not a choice. It's a necessity. I made sure you and your mother were safe, but that safety comes with a price. Emily felt her heart race. She had heard him say this before, but this time, his words felt different. A price? She asked, her voice tight. Dominic took a step closer, his gaze never leaving her. Your loyalty, Emily, he said, his tone colder than before. That's the price. I've protected you. I've given you everything you could need, but nothing is free. You're part of my world now, and that means you answer to me. Emily's throat tightened. She couldn't breathe. She had been living under his roof, accepting his help, but she hadn't fully grasped what that meant. Now, standing in front of him, she realized that she had no power here. She was at his mercy. I never asked for any of this, she said, her voice shaking. Dominic's expression didn't change. I know, he replied, his voice softer now, almost as if he were trying to offer some form of comfort. But this is the way things are. The world we live in isn't kind. It doesn't give you choices. You have to take what you're given, and you either learn to survive or you don't. Emily swallowed hard, her mind racing. She had always believed in the possibility of escape, of finding a way out of the darkness that had surrounded her. But now, standing here, she realized that her hope had been nothing more than a fantasy. She was trapped. I've kept you safe, Emily, Dominic said, stepping closer again. But you need to understand that you owe me. I can't protect you forever if you don't start understanding what's at stake. Emily didn't know how to respond. The weight of his words pressed down on her, making it hard to think clearly. I just want to go home, she said quietly, her voice barely audible. Dominic's eyes darkened, his jaw tightening. This is your home now, he said firmly. You'll never be able to go back to what you once had. That life is gone. You need to accept that. Emily's heart sank. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know how to live in this new world, where everything was controlled, where every action, every word, was weighed against the power Dominic held over her. So what now? She asked, her voice small. Dominic stared at her for a long moment before speaking again. Now, you learn. You learn how to navigate this world, how to survive in it. And when the time comes, you'll know exactly what you need to do. Emily wanted to argue, to fight back, but she knew it was pointless. She was in too deep now. There was no escaping this life. Dominic turned to leave, his steps echoing in the quiet garden. We'll talk more later, he said without looking back. Emily stood there for a long time, her mind whirling with confusion and fear. She didn't know what to expect from this new world, but she knew one thing for sure. There was no turning back. The days that followed Dominic's chilling conversation with Emily were some of the most difficult of her life. Each morning, she woke up with a heavy heart, the weight of the life she had been forced into pressing down on her chest. She had no way of knowing who to trust, or if anyone was truly on her side. The mansion, with its grand walls and polished marble floors, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a prison. She spent her time in the room Dominic had assigned to her, not daring to leave for fear of what lay beyond the iron gates that kept her isolated from the outside world. Her only source of comfort was her mother, who, despite the trauma she had endured, still tried to keep things normal between them. Sarah had changed since they arrived at the mansion, more withdrawn, more distant, but Emily could tell she still cared for her. They had no choice but to rely on each other now. One evening, after dinner, Dominic summoned Emily to his office. It was the first time he had asked to speak to her alone since the garden conversation, and Emily's stomach churned with anxiety. She had grown to expect these moments, when he would remind her of her place in his world and reassert his control. As she walked down the long hallway toward his office, her mind raced with the questions she had been too afraid to ask. What did he want from her now? What was his plan? When she entered the office, Dominic was standing by the window, looking out over the darkened grounds. He turned as she walked in, his eyes scanning her face with a cool, calculating look. Sit, he said simply, gesturing to the chair in front of his desk. Emily obeyed, her hands trembling as she clasped them together in her lap. She could feel the tension in the air, the weight of his gaze making her uneasy. I've been thinking, Dominic began, his voice low and steady. About what comes next. About you. Emily swallowed hard. She didn't like the sound of that. What do you mean? She asked, her voice small. Dominic leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk in front of him. I've kept you here to keep you safe. But safety comes at a cost, he said, his tone hardening. You're here because I need you. I need you to be part of this, part of my world. You're not just some innocent bystander anymore. You're involved. Emily felt a cold shiver run down her spine. Involved in what? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Dominic's eyes never left hers as he spoke. In the business. In the family. Emily's heart raced. She had heard the whispers, the rumors of Dominic's dealings, of the dangerous world he was part of. But hearing him say it out loud made it feel real. I'm not a part of your business, she whispered, shaking her head. I didn't choose this. I didn't ask for any of it. Dominic's gaze hardened, and for a moment, Emily saw a flash of the man he truly was. Cold, ruthless, and in control. You don't get to choose, he said, his voice like ice. You're already part of it, whether you like it or not. Emily wanted to argue, to scream, to tell him that this wasn't her life, that she didn't belong here. But the words caught in her throat. She had no power here. She was trapped. You're going to learn how to survive in this world, Emily, Dominic continued. It's not going to be easy, but I'll make sure you have the tools you need. You'll be part of the family, and you'll do what's necessary to protect it. Emily felt her stomach twist. She didn't want this. She didn't want to be part of his world, part of the violence, the lies, the deals that had brought her and her mother into this hell. But there was no way out. I don't know how to do this, Emily said softly, her voice shaking. Dominic's expression softened for a brief moment, but it was fleeting. He stood up and walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. You'll learn, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. And when the time comes, you'll be able to stand on your own. But for now, you need to understand that this is your life now. You can't escape it. Emily looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of compassion, but all she saw was cold determination. He wasn't going to let her go. And my mother? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What happens to her? Dominic's gaze flickered for a moment, and Emily could see the slightest hint of something softer in his eyes. Your mother is safe, he said quietly. I'll make sure of that. But you need to understand, she's not the one who owes me. Emily's heart sank. She had hoped, for a moment, that her mother could be free of this. But now, she saw the truth. They were both trapped, and there was no way out. Dominic took a step back, his face returning to its usual mask of control. You'll have a role to play in this family, Emily. And when the time comes, you'll step up. But for now, you stay in the background. You learn. You wait. Emily nodded, though she wasn't sure she could accept this new reality. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life would never be the same. The following days brought a strange stillness to Emily's life in the mansion. The weight of Dominic's words still echoed in her mind. She was part of this world now, whether she liked it or not. She had no choice but to comply, to learn, to adapt. The fear of what might happen if she disobeyed was always present, but it was the uncertainty that weighed most heavily on her. She spent most of her time trying to make sense of the life she had been thrust into. Every day, she tried to find a way out, but the mansion, with its endless hallways and guarded gates, made her feel trapped. The walls were closing in. There was no escape, not unless Dominic allowed it. But even in this vast, oppressive space, there were moments when Emily felt a spark of hope. During the rare times when she and her mother were able to spend time together, Emily would feel the brief comfort of the bond they shared. Sarah had grown quieter since their arrival, but Emily could still see the care in her eyes. She could still feel her mother's love, even if they were both prisoners in a gilded cage. Emily wanted to believe that they could escape, that there was still a chance to reclaim their old lives. But as the days passed, she realized more and more that the life she had once known was slipping further and further away. It wasn't until one evening, when Dominic summoned her again, that the reality of her situation hit her like a wave. She entered his office with a sense of dread, the familiar feeling of helplessness washing over her as she stood in front of him. Dominic was sitting behind his desk, his sharp eyes fixed on her as she approached. He didn't say anything at first, just studied her, his gaze weighing her down like an invisible force. Finally, he spoke. It's time for you to understand what this world is really about, he said, his voice calm but firm. Emily's stomach twisted. What do you mean? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Dominic stood up and walked around the desk, his presence overwhelming as he moved closer to her. I've kept you protected, Emily. I've kept you safe from the people who would have no hesitation in hurting you. But now, you need to learn what happens when you become part of this world. You need to learn how to survive in it. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. I don't want this. I didn't choose this life, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic's eyes flickered with something like amusement, though his expression remained neutral. You didn't choose it, but you're in it now. And you need to understand that it's not about what you want anymore. It's about what you can do to stay alive. He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. You're not like the others. You're not from this world. But you will be, in time. Emily shook her head, her mind reeling with confusion and fear. I don't want to be a part of this. I just want to go home, she whispered, her voice breaking. Dominic sighed, a long, slow exhale that seemed to carry with it a hint of impatience. There's no home for you anymore, Emily, he said quietly. That life is gone. This is your home now. The finality in his voice was like a punch to the gut. Emily felt the tears well up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She couldn't let him see her weak. What do you want me to do? She asked, her voice barely audible. Dominic's gaze softened, though his eyes were still sharp and calculating. I'm not asking you to do anything right now, but you need to understand that your life is in my hands. And when the time comes, you'll be asked to make decisions. Decisions that will determine whether you survive or not. You'll have to be strong, Emily. Stronger than you've ever been before. Emily nodded slowly, though her mind was still spinning. She didn't know what she was supposed to do, or how she was supposed to survive in a world that seemed so foreign and dangerous. But one thing was clear, she was stuck. There was no escape, no way out. You'll learn, Dominic said, his voice softening just slightly. And when you do, you'll understand why this is the only way. You'll see the bigger picture. You'll see the power I have. And you'll see the role you'll play in this world. Emily wanted to argue, to fight back, but she couldn't find the words. She was powerless. I don't want this, she whispered again, her voice barely audible. You don't have a choice, Dominic replied. But you will survive. I'll make sure of that. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Emily standing there, alone with her thoughts. The weight of his words pressed down on her, and she knew deep in her gut that there was no turning back. She was part of this world now, whether she liked it or not. And the only thing left to do was survive. Weeks passed, and Emily found herself sinking deeper into a world she never chose. Dominic's words echoed in her mind. You're part of this now. She had tried to fight it, but the reality was inescapable. Every corner of the mansion, every glance from the guards, every word Dominic spoke reminded her that there was no going back. She was trapped, and the world outside seemed like a distant memory. She had been living in the mansion for over a month now, and though she had learned to survive the silence and isolation, she still couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something was missing. One evening, after spending most of the day alone in her room, Emily ventured out into the mansion's vast garden. The night air was crisp, and the silence of the estate was only broken by the occasional rustle of the leaves. She walked slowly, taking in the stillness. For a brief moment, she felt free. But the moment was fleeting. As she reached the edge of the garden, she saw him. Dominic. He was standing by a stone fountain, his back to her, looking out into the darkness. She hesitated, not sure whether to approach him, but something about his presence pulled her in. She took a step forward, then another, until she was standing just behind him. He didn't turn, but he knew she was there. What are you doing out here? His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a subtle warning. Emily stood still for a moment, trying to gather her thoughts. She didn't want to seem weak, but she had to know. Why are you doing this? She asked quietly. Why are you making us stay here? Dominic remained silent for a moment, his gaze still fixed on the fountain. I've told you before, he said, his voice low. You're here because you belong here. You and your mother are under my protection. This is the safest place for you. Emily's frustration bubbled over. Safe? I don't feel safe here, she snapped, her voice rising. I feel like I'm trapped. This isn't my life. This isn't where I belong. Dominic finally turned to face her, his cold eyes locking onto hers. You think I don't know that? He asked, his tone suddenly hard. But you're here now. And you need to understand that there's no going back. You have a place in this world, whether you want it or not. And if you want to survive, you'll have to learn to accept it. Emily's heart raced, the words hitting her like a punch. I don't want this, she said, her voice trembling. I never asked for any of this. Dominic stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. No one asked for this life, Emily, he said, his voice soft but firm. But this is what it is. And you need to start thinking like one of us. Start seeing things the way I do. Emily looked away, the anger and fear building inside her. She didn't know what to think anymore. She had hoped that she could find a way out, a way to escape from this life. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that there was no way out. She was in too deep, and the only thing left to do was learn how to survive. I'll never be like you, she said quietly, her voice barely audible. Dominic didn't respond at first. He just looked at her, as if weighing her words. Then, after a long silence, he spoke again. You don't have to be like me, Emily, he said, his tone softer now. But you do have to learn how to survive. This world is unforgiving, and if you want to keep your mother safe, you'll have to play by the rules. Emily's heart sank. She didn't want to play by his rules. She didn't want to be a part of his world. But deep down, she knew she had no choice. What happens now? She asked, her voice small. Dominic stepped back, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Now, he said, you start learning. You start understanding what this world is about. And when the time comes, you'll be ready. Emily didn't know what to say. She didn't know if she would ever be ready. But she knew that whatever happened, she would have to do whatever it took to protect herself and her mother. As Dominic turned to leave, he looked back over his shoulder. Remember, Emily, he said, his voice cold once more. There's no way out. Not for you. Not for anyone. And with that, he disappeared into the shadows, leaving Emily standing alone in the garden, the weight of his words pressing down on her. Emily spent the next few days lost in thought, unable to escape the overwhelming weight of Dominic's words. She had no choice but to play by the rules he set, but the more she tried to adapt, the more she felt like a stranger in her own life. Every moment she spent in the mansion reminded her that the world she once knew was gone, replaced by a reality she had never imagined. It was a world dominated by power, control, and fear. Her every move was watched, her every decision scrutinized. There was no escaping it. The mansion felt like a prison, its high walls and iron gates separating her from the rest of the world. Despite all the luxury, all the wealth, it was a cage. A beautiful cage, but a cage nonetheless. And she was its prisoner. It wasn't just the physical confinement that made Emily feel trapped. It was the mental and emotional walls that Dominic had built around her. He had told her time and again that she was part of his world now, that there was no turning back. She was stuck with him, whether she liked it or not. And every time he looked at her, it felt like he was reminding her of just how powerless she truly was. Emily didn't know what to do with herself. She spent her days walking the endless halls of the mansion, trying to make sense of it all. She was being trained, prepared for a world she didn't want to be a part of, yet it felt like everything she did was a step closer to becoming someone she didn't recognize. She wasn't sure if she was becoming a survivor or just another pawn in Dominic's game. One evening, as she walked through the mansion's grand dining hall, Emily noticed a group of men gathered around a long, polished table. They were speaking in hushed tones, their faces hard, their words sharp. She recognized some of them as Dominic's associates, the ones who always seemed to be lurking in the background, watching, waiting. She had seen them around the mansion, but they had never paid her any attention. Tonight, however, something felt different. Dominic was sitting at the head of the table, his eyes cold as he listened to their discussion. Emily hesitated, unsure if she should approach, but curiosity got the better of her. She stepped closer, careful not to draw attention to herself, and listened in on their conversation. We can't keep hiding her forever, one of the men was saying, his voice low and gravelly. We need to make a move. If we don't act now, Petrov will take everything. Emily's heart skipped a beat at the mention of Petrov. She had heard his name whispered around the mansion, always in hushed, fearful tones. He was a dangerous man, the kind of man who ruled the underworld with an iron fist. And now, it seemed, Dominic was preparing for a confrontation with him. I know what's at stake, Dominic replied, his voice calm but firm. But I won't make a move until I'm certain we have the upper hand. We won't risk everything on a gamble. Emily didn't understand the details, but she could feel the tension in the air, thick and palpable. She knew that whatever was happening, it was bigger than anything she had ever known. She was caught in the middle of something dangerous, something she didn't fully comprehend, but it was clear that her life, her safety, was tied to it all. As the conversation continued, Emily's mind raced. She didn't want to be a part of this world, but the more she heard, the more she realized that there was no escaping it. The world of Mafia, of power struggles and dangerous deals, was her world now. She was part of it, whether she liked it or not. The realization hit her hard. She was no longer the innocent girl who had run away from home, hoping to find safety. She was trapped in a world of violence, deception, and control, and there was no way out. The only choice she had was to survive. As the meeting broke up, the men stood and left the room, casting wary glances at Emily as they passed. Dominic remained seated, his eyes fixed on the table, lost in thought. Emily wanted to speak to him, to ask him what all of this meant for her and her mother, but she knew better than to confront him directly. He didn't tolerate questions. He didn't tolerate weakness. So she kept her silence, standing in the shadows of the grand hall, waiting for him to acknowledge her. When Dominic finally looked up, his eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw something other than cold calculation in his gaze. It was fleeting, a brief flicker of something softer, but it was enough to make her wonder if there was more to him than the ruthless man she had come to know. "Come here," he said, his voice low. Emily stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what he wanted from her, but she couldn't refuse him. Not now. Not ever. "You've seen how things work around here," he said, his voice steady. "You're learning. But you need to understand something, Emily." She looked up at him, her breath catching in her throat. "What?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to like it," he said quietly, "but you need to accept it. This is who you are now, and I will protect you, but only if you play by the rules." Emily nodded slowly, the weight of his words settling in her chest. She had no choice. This was her life now. She could either accept it, or she could fall, and falling wasn't an option. Emily stood in the dimly lit room, her heart pounding as she faced Dominic. The weight of the past few months pressed down on her like a storm, threatening to drown her. She had learned to survive, to accept her new reality, but she still couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something deep within her that refused to accept the world she had been forced into. Dominic had told her that she belonged to this world now, that her life was tied to his in ways she could never fully understand. She had spent days in silence, listening to his instructions, obeying his every command, but her mind had always been racing, searching for a way out, a way to break free. But that night, as she stood before him, she realized that there was no escape. No matter how hard she tried, no matter how far she ran, she was bound to this world. Dominic's words echoed in her mind. This is your home now. She had tried to fight it, to rebel, but the reality was that she had no choice. She was part of his world, and nothing she did could change that. You've done well, Dominic said, his voice steady and calm as he stepped closer to her. Emily didn't know how to respond. She wasn't sure if she was meant to feel grateful, scared, or something else entirely. I never asked for this, she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Dominic looked at her for a long moment, his cold, calculating gaze never wavering. I know, he said softly, almost as if he understood. None of us ask for this life, Emily. But sometimes, it's the life we're given. His words were laced with an unsettling truth, and Emily felt a chill run through her. She had never wanted any of this. She had only wanted a simple life with her mother, free from fear, free from the violence that had consumed them both. But as she stood there, looking into Dominic's eyes, she realized that her old life was gone. There was no returning to it. There was no going back. You'll never be free of this, Dominic continued, his voice low but firm. This world, this life, it's all you have now. You either accept it, or you perish. Emily's chest tightened, the weight of his words crushing her. She didn't want to accept this. She didn't want to live in a world where she had no control, where she was at the mercy of people like Dominic. But as she stood there, facing him, she understood the brutal reality. She had no choice. She had to accept it. She had to survive. I won't let anything happen to you, Dominic said, almost as if reading her thoughts. You'll be part of my world, and I'll make sure you stay protected. But it's a dangerous world, Emily, and you need to learn how to navigate it, how to survive in it. Emily swallowed hard, the reality of her situation settling in like a stone in her stomach. She didn't want this life, but she had to learn how to live it. She had no other option. What happens now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic stepped back, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Now, you start becoming part of this family. You learn the rules. You learn how to play the game. And when the time comes, you'll know exactly what to do. Emily felt a flicker of something. Fear, anger, maybe even hope, but it was fleeting. She didn't know if she was ready for this. She didn't know if she could ever be ready for this. But as Dominic turned and walked toward the door, she realized that she didn't have a choice. The door clicked shut behind him, and Emily stood there, alone in the quiet room. The world outside, the life she had once known, was gone. There was no going back. And as the reality of her situation settled in, Emily knew that she had to do whatever it took to survive in the world she had been thrust into. There was no way out, but perhaps, just maybe, there was a way. To fight. She didn't know what the future held, but she was determined to find out. And she would do whatever it took to protect herself, to protect her mother, and to survive in this dark, dangerous world. I am excited to share this captivating tale of dark romance, where danger, power, and emotion intertwine in a gripping story. Emily's life is changed forever when she is thrust into a world of control, power, and uncertainty. Trapped in a mansion with a man who is both her protector and captor, she must learn to survive in a world dominated by dark forces. The relationship between Emily and Dominic is filled with intense emotions, pulling her deeper into the world of dark romance. As she navigates this treacherous world, Emily's feelings of fear, hope, and desire begin to blur, revealing a complicated and twisted connection. The journey is filled with obstacles as Emily faces the harsh reality of her situation, and the dark romance that unfolds leaves her questioning everything. As she tries to find a way to survive and protect her mother, Emily's path intersects with the dangerous underworld of Mafia bosses, dark decisions, and inevitable choices. The tension between Emily and Dominic continues to rise as their relationship evolves in the shadows of a dangerous world. Will Emily accept her fate, or will she fight to reclaim her freedom? The dark romance explores themes of power, control, and survival, drawing you deeper into this world where every move is critical. The twists and turns of this tale make it impossible to look away as Emily confronts the darkness in her life and in her heart. If you're a fan of dark romance, this story will captivate you with its emotional depth and unpredictable characters.